You only focus on your little home business and don't bother with the housework. And so my mother-in-law's regular snide remarks began again. I'm Susan, a 32-year-old web designer. I live with my husband John and his mother in our family home, which used to be John's childhood home. I was employed at a company before I got married, but I decided to go independent and work from home as a web designer after tying the knot. Most of my work comes from referrals from the company I used to work for, from clients who liked my design. They didn't want to lose a valuable resource like me, so they keep sending work my way. This setup is beneficial for both of us. I save on commuting time, and I had also wanted to properly manage my household duties after marriage. Both my former employer and I are satisfied with this arrangement. However, my live-in mother-in-law doesn't seem to find it amusing that I'm working. She's old-fashioned and often says, "It's common sense for a wife to become a full-time housewife and support her husband once she's married." It's different from those old days. Most households have both partners working now. John tries to appease her. "But you're earning the money we're living on. She needs to handle the housework properly," she retorts, seemingly unconvinced. "Your wife's not earning much with that home business of hers, is she?" Mother-in-law doesn't seem to understand my job and always refers to it as a home business. I feel like I'm managing the housework well in between my work, but she's discontented because my way of working is different from the full-time housewife she imagines. Maybe to her, who deeply cares for her only son, I'm the wicked woman who stole her precious son. She's been throwing sarcastic remarks at me since the beginning of our marriage. She seems to dislike everything I do. John told me that she's been relying more on him since his father passed away about 5 years ago. While he does seem annoyed, he also seems happy to be needed by his mother. Our home, situated in a residential area, was purchased by John's father about 30 years ago. The remaining mortgage was paid off with his life insurance, and the house is now in his mother's name. It's just the right size for the three of us, and it even has a room for me to work in, which is a big help. My mother-in-law has been living here for 30 years and seems to have many friends in the neighborhood who often come to visit. When her friends come over, I have to interrupt my work to serve them tea and snacks. When these women of her age gather, they often start talking about the issues they have with their daughters-in-law. "My daughter-in-law always runs back to her parents' house at the slightest issue. She's here only about half the year. My daughter-in-law spends money like water. My son is having a hard time. We even had debt collectors coming. It was terrible." Listening to these conversations from my workspace, I can't help but chuckle. They're all trying to outdo each other on how bad their daughters-in-law are. They never have anything good to say about them. "The daughter-in-law here is amazing, managing both her work and the housework." When one friend praises me, my mother-in-law doesn't seem pleased. "She's not doing anything great with her work. It's just like a little home business. I wonder how much she's earning." Huh. She intentionally says it loudly enough for me to hear. "Really? My daughter-in-law spends all the money she makes from her part-time job on herself," one friend shared. In response, another friend said, "The money my wife earns is hers, and the money her husband earns is for all of us." Everyone burst into laughter at this. "Things weren't like that in our day," my mother-in-law began, launching into one of her usual tales. I put on my headphones to drown her out. I've heard these stories countless times, and am tired of them. Even worse, they often disrespect modern wives, and I can't bear to listen. I block out the outside noise and focus on my work. One day, John announced he wanted to get a new car. "I've been thinking about getting a new car. Is that okay?" he asked casually during dinner. "Why do you need your wife's permission to buy a car?" my mother-in-law snapped. John hurriedly tried to placate her. "Well, it's a car for all of us. I can't just decide on my own, can I?" Indeed, buying a car is a big decision that shouldn't be made alone. Still, my mother-in-law wasn't satisfied and continued to argue with him. "You're the only one with a driver's license, so you should buy whatever car you want." My poor husband, who usually does whatever his mother tells him to, looked at me helplessly. "You can decide," I said, throwing him a lifeline. "Don't constantly ask your wife's opinion. Just decide for yourself." John always checks with me or his mother about everything. It's good that he's not selfish, but it's a bit frustrating how indecisive he is. His father, my father-in-law, was the type of man who decided everything on his own, and my mother-in-law often complained about it. Growing up witnessing such dynamics, John believes it's wrong to be too assertive. On the other hand, my mother-in-law, who grew up with a domineering husband, believes that's how a husband should be. My mother-in-law's dissatisfaction with John's constant need for approval is directed at me. "Susan is always nagging John. That's why he's become like this. She blames me. I was taken aback and didn't know what to say. Yeah, Susan is always complaining. That's why I can't make decisions on my own. John joined in, blaming me. But I didn't say anything. I defended myself, but it was pointless. John always takes his mother's side. We've been married for about 2 years, but he's never defended me in front of his mother. When she's not around, he apologizes, saying, "I'm sorry, you're really the most important to me." But I can't trust him anymore. He initially seemed considerate of me, but he never stands up for me. I'm starting to wonder if I need to reconsider our relationship. I'm worried about whether I can continue living with John. Kindness and indecisiveness are different things. I wish he would stand up to his mother. About a month later, John's new car arrived. "The smell of a new car is the best. Let's all go for a drive on my next day off," he said gleefully. His excitement was infectious, and even my mother-in-law seemed happy. "That's a nice car. It must have been expensive, right? But it's okay since it's coming out of your salary, right?" My husband didn't respond to her question, instead enjoying fiddling around with various parts of the car. I was dumbfounded as I looked at that expensive-looking new car. There's certainly a limit, even though I said he could do as he pleased. My husband came into the house in high spirits. I confronted him. "How much did that car cost?" He answered nonchalantly, $60,000. Seeing my shocked face, my husband continued curiously, "But you said I could buy any car I wanted, didn't you?" My mother-in-law quickly took my husband's side. "That's right. You left it up to John, so don't complain now." I did leave everything up to him at the time, but I wanted him to consider our financial situation as well. "Where is that kind of money coming from?" I asked my husband, ignoring my mother-in-law's comment. "Well, I'm paying with a loan," he stammered. My mother-in-law shouted in his place, "Susan, don't complain. You're not the one paying." I don't know if she was angry because I ignored her or because she didn't like what I said to my husband, but she glared at me with a fierce expression. "You're a disagreeable daughter-in-law, always complaining about something, even though you're living off John's salary," my mother-in-law retorted with an unusually harsh tone. "I have a job, too," I shot back. My mother-in-law didn't stay silent. "What are you talking about? You're not earning much with your part-time job. John makes $5,000 a month." She looked down on me as if mocking me. I was about to say, "That's my salary," but when I looked for my husband, he had disappeared into his room. "I've been patient until now, but I can't take it anymore. I want a daughter-in-law like you to leave as soon as possible." My mother-in-law went so far as to say that. I had been patient too. I didn't feel like discussing my salary. It seemed ridiculous, and I didn't care anymore. I was frustrated with my mother-in-law's comment, but I was dumbfounded by my husband's attitude. Wasn't it my husband who caused this argument in the first place? His usual indecisiveness had come out again. "Okay, I'll leave then," I said, and went to my home office, grabbed my laptop and other necessary items, and left the house. "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later," I told my mother-in-law, who was glaring at me with a scary face. My husband remained holed up in his room. "The next time you come here, make sure you've signed the divorce papers." My still angry mother-in-law yelled at me. "Did you hear me, you useless lady?" It was the first time I had seen my mother-in-law use such rough language, and I was surprised. I ignored her and stormed out of my in-laws' house. Was she angry because I said I would leave as she asked? Or was she angry because I confronted my husband about the money? Either way, it was a fact that I wanted to leave this house as soon as possible. Having stormed out of my husband's parents' house, I went back to my parents' house for the time being. "What happened all of a sudden?" My mother at home was surprised. "I don't know what happened, but you can stay here as long as you need to." My dad seemed to understand the situation by my unusual expression. I never heard from my husband afterwards. The man who used to treasure me before our marriage is no longer around. I can only think that I was foolish not to see a husband who only listens to his mother-in-law. I was feeling better after talking to my parents about what happened at my husband's house. It calmed me down. "You don't have children. It's better to divorce sooner rather than later," my mom told me, and I agreed. I have a job, so I wouldn't be inconvenienced in my life. On the weekend, my father helped me move my belongings out of my husband's house. My husband was nowhere to be seen, and my mother-in-law didn't appear from her room. I called out in front of my husband's room. "Thank you for everything. Could you sign the divorce papers?" I slid the divorce papers under the door. "I've signed. Is this okay?" A curt voice of my husband came from behind the door along with the divorce papers. I was sad that our marriage ended in such a way. Without saying anything to my mother-in-law, I left my husband's house. It was a house where I had lived for about 2 years, but I didn't have many good memories. I went straight to the city hall and submitted the divorce papers. I wanted to settle it quickly if it could be done with a piece of paper. After the divorce, I stayed at my parents' house and continued my work there. I was thinking of renting a room and living alone, but my mother told me, "Please, stay here for a while. It's much safer than living alone." My father was also against me living alone. "John and his mom are strange. They might come to your house." I thought that wouldn't happen, but I felt at ease being with my parents at home. Fortunately, I can work from anywhere, so I decided to live at home for a while. About 2 months had passed, and I had almost forgotten about my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law when a call came from an unknown number. Who could that be? Maybe it's a wrong number. Thinking that, I didn't answer the call. However, the calls kept coming. Reluctantly, I heard my ex-husband's voice. "Why didn't you answer the phone sooner?" He seemed quite flustered. "Well, it's an unknown number, and besides, we're not related anymore, so I'm going to hang up." As I was about to hang up, he quickly said, Wait. I can't connect my smartphone." "Why is that?" He sounded desperate. "I wouldn't know. You should check with your phone company." As I replied, I realized something. "Are you by any chance not depositing money into your bank account?" When we were married, I was depositing money from my salary into the account for paying public utilities. His salary was also transferred there, but it was such a small amount that it wasn't enough. He was selling health food products, but his basic salary was low because it was a commission system. People who get a lot of orders seem to make a lot of money, but he didn't do well. He was receiving almost only the basic salary, so only a few $100s was transferred to the account. I had been depositing money into the payment account at the end of every month, but for the past 3 months, it was only his salary. The argument about the car and me leaving the house was in the middle of the month. The payment for that new car might have already started. My ex-husband on the other end of the phone fell silent. "I've been managing all this with my own salary. From now on, you'll have to figure it out on your own," I told him. I wanted to say, "Serves you right," but held back and hung up the phone. My ex-husband probably never told his mother how much he earned. His mother didn't realize that ever since our marriage, we'd mostly been living off my salary. John must have been too embarrassed to admit that he earned less than his wife. I've heard that utilities like electricity and water are not easy to shut off. The first thing that gets cut off is usually the cell phone service, I learned. A few days later, on a quiet weekend morning, the doorbell at my house rang loudly. When my dad answered, he was arguing with someone at the front door. "We have nothing to do with you anymore, so leave." Seeing my normally calm father so angry, I knew something was wrong, and my mom and I headed towards the entrance. "I just want to see Susan," a voice demanded. Hearing my ex-mother-in-law's voice made my heart pound. Just as my dad had predicted, she'd come all the way to our home. When she saw me, my ex-mother-in-law started yelling at me with a terrifying expression on her face. "Because you stopped depositing money into the account, the electricity and water got cut off." My parents and I were taken aback. What did she mean the electricity and water got cut off? Just then, my ex-husband arrived, desperately trying to intervene. "Mom, stop it. This has nothing to do with Susan." But my ex-mother-in-law shook off John's hand and continued her tirade. "John makes $5,000. Why would the electricity and water get cut off?" "You're mistaken. I'm the one who makes $5,000. I corrected her, finally able to share what I hadn't been able to say before. My ex-mother-in-law looked surprised at my words, then turned to John. "That's right. It wasn't my salary. It was all Susan's," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "Huh? How can you earn so much with a part-time job?" My ex-mother-in-law looked at me as if I was a fox who had tricked her. "I've told you before, it's not a part-time job. It's a real job," I replied. The color drained from my ex-mother-in-law's face. "How much does John make?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "About $500 net," he answered, his voice almost disappearing. There was a moment of silence. Then my ex-mother-in-law said something unbelievable. "Susan, can't you come back? The whole leave us thing was a joke." She begged with a low posture, reminding me of someone trying to butter me up. "What are you talking about? I'm divorced. I have nothing to do with you two anymore." Even though I firmly declined, my ex-mother-in-law continued to plead in an overly familiar way. "You can just remarry John. If we start the paperwork now, it'll be fine." My dad stepped in when I was too flabbergasted to respond. "We're done with you. If you don't leave right now, we'll call the police." At the sound of my dad's intimidating voice, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law hurriedly left. "If you show up again, I'm calling the cops right away." My father delivered a final warning as the mother and son wobbled away. What a bunch of uncouth people! My mother was astounded, but my father seemed even more furious. "I'm glad you got out of that marriage, Susan." A while after that incident, I got an update about the ex-family from one of John's friends. In the end, John had sold his family home and land and moved into an apartment with his mother. The new car he barely used had been sold too, and the proceeds from the land sale had gone to pay off the remaining loan. He'd cleared his debts, but instead of settling down to work, John had blown all his money on gambling. Having squandered the money from selling his family home, he'd disappeared without a trace. His mother, left behind, had developed dementia and been placed in a care facility. I'm doing well in my job now and living alone. I've recently started dating a man I met through work. He's understanding about me being divorced and is very dedicated to his job. He's definitely not the kind of guy who relies on his wife's money to make expensive purchases, like John was. We're not engaged yet, but we both feel like we could marry each other.
I remember those days like they were yesterday. Mom, Dad, and me, Megan, the perfect little family. We weren't rich or famous, just ordinary folks living our best life. Dad worked as an accountant, always buried in numbers, but he'd light up when he got home. Mom was a teacher, spreading knowledge and kindness wherever she went. We'd spend weekends exploring the country, piling into our beat-up station wagon and hitting the road. Dad would blast his favorite oldies, and Mom would sing along, terribly off-key but not caring one bit. I'd sit in the back, rolling my eyes but secretly loving every minute of it. Those road trips were the best. We'd stop at dingy diners, ordering greasy burgers and sharing a giant milkshake. Mom would always steal my fries, claiming, "I'm just testing them for poison, sweetie." When we weren't traveling, we'd hit up the local mall. I'd drag them from store to store, trying on ridiculous outfits and begging for the latest toys. Mom was the voice of reason, but Dad was a softie. He'd slip me a few extra bucks when Mom wasn't looking, whispering, "Our little secret, Meggie." Friday nights were pizza nights. We'd order in, sprawl out on the living room floor, and watch cheesy movies. Dad would try to explain the plots, Mom would shush him, and I'd stuff my face with pepperoni, not caring about anything but the moment. I was 11 when Mom started feeling tired all the time. At first, we didn't think much of it. Teaching is exhausting after all. But then came the doctor visits, the worried whispers, the hushed phone calls. I didn't understand what was happening. Nobody told me anything, but I could feel the change in the air. The laughter became less frequent, the road trips stopped, and pizza nights were replaced with quiet, tense dinners. One night, I overheard Dad on the phone, his voice cracking as he spoke. The treatments aren't working, Mike. I don't know what we're going to do. That's when I knew. Something was very wrong with Mom, and our perfect little world was about to shatter. I wish I could go back to those happy days, freeze time, and stay in that bubble of blissful ignorance forever. But life doesn't work that way. The storm was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. For now, I close my eyes and try to remember the good times. The smell of Mom's perfume, the sound of Dad's laughter, the taste of Friday night pizza. Those memories are all I have left of the life I once knew, the life I desperately wish I could return to. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because it was pizza night, but there was no pizza, no laughter, no Mom. Just silence and the horrible beeping of hospital machines. "Megan," sweetie, Dad said, his voice cracking. "Mom, she's gone." Just like that, my world collapsed. Mom, my rock, my best friend, was gone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just stood there, numb, as Dad hugged me, his tears soaking my hair. The next few weeks were a blur of black clothes, hushed voices, and casseroles I couldn't bring myself to eat. I kept expecting Mom to walk through the door, to tell me it was all a bad dream. But she never did. Then, about 6 months after we lost Mom, something changed. Dad started going out more. I thought he was getting better, until I saw her. She was tall, blonde, and nothing like Mom. Her name was Karen, and she had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Megan, this is Karen," Dad said, looking nervous. "We've been seeing each other." I couldn't believe it. Mom wasn't even cold in her grave, and he was already replacing her. Karen bent down, her face inches from mine. "Hi, Megan. I've heard so much about you." When Dad wasn't looking, Karen's smile dropped. Her eyes turned cold, calculating. In that moment I knew. This woman was trouble. Over the next few weeks, Karen was everywhere. She'd come over for dinner, watch TV with us, even try to help me with homework. But the moment Dad's back was turned, the mask would slip. "Listen, kid," she hissed one day when we were alone. "I'm here to stay. Don't get any ideas about messing this up for me." I tried to tell Dad, I really did, but he just shook his head. "Megan, I know this is hard for you, but Karen's a good person. You're just jealous. Maybe we should get you to talk to someone." Jealous? I couldn't believe it. My own father thought I was making this up. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a therapist's office, being told I had adjustment issues and difficulty with change. Karen had somehow convinced everyone, Dad, our relatives, even the neighbors, that I was troubled. Poor Megan, I'd overhear her saying on the phone. "She's having such a hard time. There are mental problems. We're getting her the help she needs." Then came the bombshell. A year and a half after Mom died, Dad dropped the news. "Megan, Karen and I, we're getting married. We thought it'd be best if you spent the summer at camp. Give you some time to adjust." But I knew the truth. They were shipping me off so I wouldn't ruin their perfect day with my sour face, as Karen put it. I left for camp with a heavy heart, knowing that when I returned, everything would be different. My home wouldn't be mine anymore. My family was changing, and there was nothing I could do about it. I returned from camp with a knot in my stomach. The house looked the same from the outside, but as soon as I stepped through the door, I knew everything had changed. "Welcome home," Megan, Karen said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We need to talk about room arrangements. With the baby coming, we'll need to make some changes." My head spun. "Baby? What baby?" Dad's face lit up. "That's right, you don't know. Karen's pregnant. You're going to be a big sister." Karen led me upstairs, chattering about nursery colors and baby names. We stopped at my room, or what used to be my room. "We've started converting this into the nursery," Karen said, pushing open the door. My heart sank. My posters were gone, replaced by pastel wallpaper. My desk had vanished, a crib standing in its place. "Where's my stuff?" I managed to choke out. Karen waved dismissively. "Oh, we moved you to the guest room. It's cozier anyway." The guest room was barely bigger than a closet. My things were piled haphazardly on the bed, some boxes still sealed. "This is temporary, right?" I asked, looking at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Well, Meggie, with the new baby." I got the message. I was being pushed out, replaced. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, baby showers, and me trying to make myself as small as possible. Karen's belly grew, and with it, her control over our lives. Then, one crisp fall morning, my little brother was born. Despite everything, when I held him for the first time, I felt a surge of love. For a moment, I thought maybe things would get better. But Karen had other plans. "Careful, Megan," she'd say, snatching him away. "You might drop him. Or he's sleeping now. Maybe you can see him later." There was always an excuse, always a reason why I couldn't spend time with my brother. Dad was too busy with work and the new baby to notice. Years passed. I threw myself into school, counting down the days until I could leave for college. My brother grew into a sweet, curious kid, but Karen made sure our interactions were limited. Finally, my senior year arrived. One night, I overheard Karen and Dad arguing. "She needs to learn responsibility," Karen insisted. "A job right out of high school would do her good." Dad's voice was firm. "No, Sarah wanted her to go to college. We set aside money for it. Megan's going." I'd never been so grateful for my dad standing up for me. When my acceptance letter came, I cried with relief. I was getting out. I was going to start my own life, away from Karen's manipulations. On move-in day, Dad helped me pack the car. Karen and my brother stayed home. "I'm proud of you," Meggie, Dad said, hugging me goodbye. "Your mom would be too." As I drove away, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. I was leaving behind the only home I'd known, and the little brother I never really got to know. But I was also driving towards freedom, towards a future where I could be myself without Karen's shadow looming over me. College was like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make something of myself. Advertising became my passion, a world where creativity met strategy, and I could finally express myself freely. But even as I reveled in my newfound independence, there was always a nagging ache in my heart. My little brother, barely 6 when I left, was growing up without me. During rare visits home, I'd catch glimpses of the amazing kid he was becoming. "Megan, look what I drew," he'd exclaim, showing me his latest masterpiece. I'd ruffle his hair, cherishing these brief moments. "It's awesome, buddy. You're quite the artist." Karen would inevitably interrupt, whisking him away for some urgent task or another. The distance between us grew with each passing year. Graduation day arrived, a bittersweet triumph. As I stood in my cap and gown scanning the crowd, I realized Dad and Karen weren't there. Later, a terse text arrived: "Congratulations on graduating. Dad, Karen." It stung, but I refused to let it dampen my spirits. I had a future to build. Thanks to my internships and portfolio, I landed a job at a hip advertising agency in the city. Grandma Mom's mom and my guardian angel helped me secure a tiny but cozy apartment. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, pressing a check into my hand. "This is for rent. She always wanted you to have a good start." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was challenging but rewarding. I made friends, went on dates, and slowly began to heal from the wounds of my past. For 3 years, I lived in relative peace, with only occasional, awkward holiday visits to break the calm. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. "Megan, it's Dad. I have some news. We've sold the house and bought a new place. bigger, more modern. I was hoping. Well, would you help us move? It might be a good chance for us to reconnect. I was speechless. After years of distance, this sudden olive branch felt surreal. Karen would be happy to see you too, he added, though I doubted that. And your brother, Megan, he's 12 now. He asks about you all the time. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from more hurt. But another part, the part that still missed my family, that longed for reconciliation, won out. Okay, I said finally. I'll come. Great Dad's relief was palpable. I'll text you the address. See you this weekend. As I packed a bag for the weekend, my emotions swirled. Hope mingled with anxiety, excitement with dread. Whatever happened, this visit would change everything. I just didn't know if it would be for better or worse. I pulled up to the address, my jaw dropping at the sight. The house was enormous, all sleek lines and modern architecture. It looked nothing like the cozy home I grew up in. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Dad opened it, a hesitant smile on his face. Meggie, you made it. Hi, Dad, I said, stepping inside. Karen appeared behind him, her smile as plastic as ever. Megan, how? Nice of you to come, she said, her tone suggesting anything but. I looked around, expecting to see my brother. Where's... Oh, he's staying with my parents for the weekend, Karen cut in smoothly. We thought it would be easier to move without him underfoot. The look in her eyes told me everything. This was deliberate. She'd made sure my brother wouldn't be here, denying me even this small chance to reconnect with him. Swallowing my disappointment and anger, I forced a smile. So where do you want me to start? For the next few hours, I threw myself into the work. I scrubbed floors, arranged furniture, and hung curtains. It was easier than trying to make conversation with Dad or enduring Karen's false pleasantries. As I was sorting through some boxes in what would be the study, I came across a pile of framed photos. My heart stopped as I recognized one particular frame. It was a portrait of Mom, the one that used to hang in my childhood bedroom. Her smile beamed at me from beneath a layer of dust. Clutching the photo, I walked into the living room where Dad and Karen were discussing paint colors. Dad, I said, my voice shaking slightly, why is Mom's picture in a pile of junk? Dad's face fell, a mix of guilt and sadness crossing his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but Karen beat him to it. Oh, that old thing, she said dismissively. We decided those photos don't really fit with the new decor. They're a bit superfluous, don't you think? Superfluous. The word hit me like a slap. My mother's memory, reduced to an outdated decoration. Superfluous, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. This is my mother, your wife, I added, looking at Dad. Dad at least had the decency to look ashamed. Megan, we didn't mean. But I was already moving, gathering up every photo of Mom I could find. I found her old jewelry box, a few of her books. Without a word, I carried them out to my car, ignoring Karen's protests and Dad's weak attempts to explain. As I placed the last item in my trunk, I felt a storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Anger at Karen's callousness, disappointment in Dad's spinelessness, and a deep, aching sadness for the mother I'd lost and the family that seemed beyond repair. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing in the quiet street. For a moment, I considered getting in the car and driving away, leaving this mess behind once and for all. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of Mom, her voice in my head telling me to be strong. Maybe it was the thought of my little brother who I still hadn't seen. Or maybe it was just sheer stubbornness, refusing to let Karen win. Whatever it was, I found myself walking back into the house. Karen was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding to avoid confrontation. Dad stood in the hallway looking lost, so I went back to cleaning, trying not to think about Dad's betrayal. As I was about to leave, Dad caught my arm. "Megan, wait. There's something else." I turned, eyebrow raised. "What now?" He shifted uncomfortably. "We're having a housewarming party in a few days. We would really appreciate your help." Before I could respond, Karen swooped in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh yes, Megan, we could really use your assistance. Perhaps you could handle the catering? I'll take care of the cleaning, invitations, and overall organization." I opened my mouth to refuse, but Dad jumped in. "Please, Meggie, all our relatives and friends will be there. We can't manage without you." His pleading eyes wore me down. Despite everything, a small part of me still wanted to make him happy. "Fine," I sighed. "I'll help with the food, I'll even pay for it myself." Karen's smile widened. "Wonderful. We're thinking of an Italian theme. You know, to christen the new kitchen." I nodded, an idea forming. "Actually, I know the best Italian restaurant. I'll order from there. Quality guaranteed." Oh, Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's the name of this restaurant?" Bella Notte replied, watching her carefully. She nodded, looking satisfied. "Sounds perfect. We'll leave it in your capable hands then." As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Karen's sudden agreeableness was suspicious, but I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. Over the next few days, I threw myself into planning the perfect menu. I called my friend Maria, owner of Bella Notte. "Megan, it's been too long," she answered cheerfully. "Hey Maria, I need a favor. My dad's having a housewarming party, and I'm in charge of food. Think you can help me out?" "For you? Anything. What are you thinking?" We spent an hour crafting the perfect Italian spread. Antipasti platters, handmade pastas, tiramisu for dessert, the works. I spared no expense, wanting to prove I could handle this responsibility. After finalizing the order, I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Despite everything, a small part of me hoped this party might be a turning point. Maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal our fractured family. The next week dragged by slowly. I kept myself busy with work, but my mind often wandered to the upcoming party. I checked and double-checked the order, making sure everything was perfect. The day before the housewarming party, my phone rang. It was Maria from Bella Notte. "Hey Megan, I'm a bit confused. Your stepmother called yesterday and asked to move the food delivery to today. Did the party date change?" My heart sank. "What? No, it's supposed to be tomorrow." Oh, Maria sounded worried. "Well, I wanted to double-check with you before making any changes." I thanked her, my mind racing. After hanging up, I immediately called Karen, my suspicions on high alert. "Hi Karen, just wanted to confirm the party details for tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh yes, everything's set for tomorrow at 7 p.m., she replied smoothly. "We're looking forward to it." I thanked her and ended the call, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. It was clear now Karen had tried to change the delivery date behind my back. She wanted me to miss the party entirely. Taking a deep breath, I called Maria back. "Hey, it's me again. I need to cancel the order," I said, my voice tight. "Cancel? But Megan, are you sure? It's a lot of food and it's all paid for." "I know. Keep the payment, consider it a gift. Use the food for the restaurant if you can." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. The betrayal stung, but a part of me wasn't surprised. This was classic Karen, always finding new ways to push me out. The same evening, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my social media and saw my cousin was live streaming from the party. There it was, the housewarming in full swing, happening right now, a day early. I watched, a mix of hurt and anger building inside me, as Karen showed off the new house. She preened for the camera, pointing out design features and accepting compliments from guests. Suddenly, a voice off camera asked, "Where's Megan? I thought she'd be here." Karen's face changed, a look of false concern replacing her smile. "Oh, you know Megan, she's always been a bit unsociable. Some mental health issues, poor dear. She said she couldn't make it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mental health issues? Unsociable? The lies flowed so easily from her lips. Karen quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation back to the house. "Now, who's ready for some amazing Italian food? It should be here any minute." The guests cheered, and Karen beamed at the camera. Half an hour passed, and I could see the guests starting to look restless. Karen's smile became strained as she kept assuring everyone the food would arrive any minute now. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the live stream. Karen's perfectly crafted facade was crumbling before my eyes. Her smile had become a grimace as she dialed the restaurant's number, the speakerphone amplifying every word for the gathered guests. "Hello, Bellanot. This is Karen. Where is our food order?" The response was clear and devastating. "I'm sorry, Mom, but that order was canceled earlier today by Megan. There won't be any delivery." Karen's face contorted with rage. "What? That little John," she shrieked, turning to my father. "Call Megan right now." Dad, looking flustered, pulled out his phone. I watched, heart pounding, as he dialed my number. When I answered, his voice boomed through the speakerphone. "Megan, how could you cancel the food order? You've ruined everything." Taking a deep breath, I replied calmly, "Dad, why did you change the date of the housewarming? Why wasn't I invited?" The room fell silent. Dad's face paled as he stammered, "We," Karen said. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged meaningful glances, eyeing Karen and Dad with suspicion. Suddenly, Karen snatched the phone from Dad's hand. "You ungrateful brat," she screeched. "After everything we've done for you, you're trying to sabotage us, aren't you?" I let her rant for a moment before speaking, my voice steady and clear. "I think everyone can see now who really has mental health issues in this family. And it's not me." Karen's hysterical shouting filled the room, but I could see the damage was done. Guests were backing away, some already heading for the door. "I'm done being your scapegoat, Karen," I said firmly. "And Dad, I'm done watching you choose her over your own daughter. Goodbye." I ended the call and closed the live stream, my hands shaking but my resolve strong. It was over. The lies, the manipulation, all of it laid bare for everyone to see. In the days that followed, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages from Dad and other family members. I needed time to process, to heal. A week later, Dad showed up at my apartment. He looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. "Megan, I'm so sorry," he began. "I've been blind. I let Karen control everything, and I lost sight of what really matters. Please, give me a chance to make things right." I wanted to slam the door in his face, but something in his expression stopped me. "It's not that simple, Dad. You abandoned me. You forgot about me." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I want to change. I promise I'll do better. Please, Meggie." Slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild our relationship. Dad started calling regularly, and we met for coffee every week. He even brought my little brother along sometimes, away from Karen's watchful eye. As for Karen, I heard through the grapevine that she'd become something of a pariah among the family. Her lies exposed, she retreated into a shell of bitterness. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. I threw myself into my career, climbing the ranks at the advertising agency. My creativity flourished, fueled by the emotional turmoil I'd endured. I don't know what the future holds for my family. The wounds are deep, and healing takes time. But for the first time in years, I feel hopeful. I'm living life on my terms, pursuing my passions and slowly, carefully, allowing love back into my heart. As I look out at the city lights from my apartment window, I can almost hear Mom's voice. "You're stronger than you know," Maggie she used to say. And you know what? She was right.
My name's Lila. I've always been the kind of person who prefers code to cocktails, a quiet evening over a raucous party. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the unexpected. That night at the party, hosted by a friend from college, was supposed to be another routine social gathering. I was already planning my escape route to my cozy apartment and my awaiting laptop when he walked in. David was hard to miss. At 22, he had the kind of energy that filled up a room. With his athlete's build and an easy smile, he was surrounded by admirers the moment he stepped through the door. I tried to keep to my corner, nursing my drink and fiddling with my phone, but fate had other plans. "Hey, you're Lila, right?" His voice cut through the noise, pulling me back from my digital refuge. I looked up to find those intense eyes fixed on me. "Yeah, that's me. And you are?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. David Matthews, the rising hockey star everyone seemed to talk about. "David, I've heard a lot about you. You're the genius programmer at Turner Tech, right?" His grin was infectious, and I found myself smiling, despite my initial resolve to remain disinterested. Genius might be stretching it, but yeah, I work for an IT company, I said, trying to play it cool. David chuckled, pulling up a chair next to me, uninvited but not unwelcome. "So, what brings you to a party where you clearly wish you were anywhere else?" I shrugged, looking around at the bustling room. Guess I was trying to be social. My friends keep telling me I need to get out more. "That's funny." David leaned in, his voice dropping to a playful whisper. "Because I've been trying to get out of these things too. Too much fake chatter." "You want to escape? Let's grab some real food. This party stuff is just fluff." I hesitated. This wasn't my usual style, but there was something about David that felt different, genuine. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he really saw me, not just the quiet girl in the corner. As we sneaked out of the party, the cool night air felt like a splash of clarity. We ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with greasy fries and endless coffee. David ordered the biggest burger on the menu for us to split, and I found myself sharing stories about coding mishaps and server crashes. David listened, really listened, nodding and asking questions that showed he got it, even if he didn't know a router from a modem. It was refreshing, talking to someone who didn't glaze over when I geeked out about technology. As the night turned into early morning, I realized that David wasn't just a hotshot athlete, he was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly down to earth. Maybe that's why when he suggested we do this again next Friday, I didn't think twice before saying yes. David and I had been the talk of our circle since he started courting me. Despite our age difference, with me being 32 and him only 22, there was something electric between us. Honestly, it was flattering to have someone so vibrant and full of promise by my side. The day David decided to introduce me to his mom, Susan, I was nervous. The moment we arrived, the look on her face said it all. It was like she had tasted something sour just seeing me. "So, you're Lila," Susan began, sizing me up as if I were an item at an auction. "David has told me very little about you, which I suppose isn't surprising." I tried to smile, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Susan." She barely touched my hand before pulling back. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss, apparently." As we sat in her meticulously decorated living room, the air thick with tension, Susan didn't waste any time. "David tells me you two are planning to marry." He's a professional athlete, on his way to becoming a star. And you, Lila, you're a programmer, correct? And quite a bit older than him. Yes, I am a programmer, I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite her tone. And yes, there's an age difference, but we love each other. Susan scoffed. Love, she muttered under her breath. David, she's 32. You're just 22. You should be thinking about your career, not settling down with someone who... Mom, David interrupted, his voice firm. I love Lila. That's what matters to me. We're getting married. Susan's eyes narrowed. You're blinded by infatuation. Think about your future, your contracts, your endorsements. This is a mistake. I felt a surge of defiance. I'm not here to argue, Susan. I came because David wanted us to meet. I respect your concern, but our decision to marry is ours to make. David nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. Exactly. We've talked this through, and we're serious. Lila's age, her job, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is how we feel about each other. Susan leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment before she spoke again. Well, it seems I can't convince my own son to think clearly. If you're going to be part of this family, Lila, I expect you to understand the pressures David will face. Can you handle that? Without dragging him down? Her words stung, but I held my gaze. I'm not here to drag anyone down, Susan. I support David fully, in his career and everything else. There was a pause, a heavy, uncomfortable silence, before Susan stood up abruptly. I need to think about this. David, you're welcome to stay for dinner. Lila, I think it's best if you leave now. David started to protest, but I stopped him. It's okay, David. Let's not make this harder. I'll go, but think about what I said, Susan. I'm not the enemy here. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy. David was thrilled too when I told him, and he immediately suggested we speed up our wedding plans. Let's not wait, Lila. Let's get married as soon as we can, he said, his eyes shining with excitement and a bit of urgency. The joy of our news, however, didn't quite extend to everyone. When David broke the news to his mom, Susan, her reaction was less than enthusiastic. You're what? Pregnant? This changes things, she muttered, clearly agitated by the unexpected twist. David tried to calm her down. Mom, this is good news. We're happy. Susan paced the room, her brows furrowed in thought, before she turned to face us with a stern look. Fine, but if you're going to do this, you're doing it on my terms. First, you two are signing a prenup. A prenup? I echoed, my stomach sinking. Yes, to ensure my son's future earnings in hockey are protected. He's going to be making millions, and we can't have any risks, Susan explained, her voice firm and non-negotiable. David looked at me, his expression apologetic. Lila, I know it's not ideal, but my mom has a point about protecting the career I'm building. It's just a formality. I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation settling in. Okay, what's the second condition? I asked, bracing myself. You need to show your commitment to this family, Lila. I want you to handle the initial mortgage payment for your new house, 50% up front. Susan's eyes were locked on mine, challenging me. I was stunned. 50%? That's a lot of money, Susan. David was quick to jump in. Mom, that's too much. Lila, we can figure something out. But I knew what I had to do. I called my dad later that day, explaining the situation and how much I needed. Without a moment's hesitation, he agreed. I'll help you, Lila. It's important you start your married life on stable ground, he said, transferring $200,000 to my account. With the financial and prenuptial conditions met, we moved forward with the wedding plans. The day arrived faster than I had anticipated, filled with a mix of emotions. Our wedding was beautiful, set in a quaint little chapel with flowers everywhere, and our closest friends and family gathered. I walked down the aisle, my heart full of love for David and our future together. My parents looked so proud and happy, their smiles beaming across the room. But there, off to the side, stood Susan with a look that could only be described as sour. Throughout the evening, her displeasure was evident. She wore a tight smile as guests congratulated her, her eyes often darting towards me with undisguised disapproval. Despite her attitude, David and I tried to focus on the positive. We mingled with guests, laughed, danced, and celebrated our union and the little life growing inside me. After the wedding, it didn't take long for life to take a sharp turn into the unexpected. Susan declared she'd be moving in with us, supposedly to help me through the early stages of pregnancy. I wasn't keen on the idea, but to avoid any drama, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know, this decision would soon transform my home into a battleground where peace was a rare commodity. Within weeks of moving in, Susan had taken over the house. It was subtle at first, a few items moved here and there, some new decorations. But soon, her presence and influence grew stronger, more invasive. She didn't do much in terms of actual housework or helping me. Instead, she spent her days shopping with the money David made from his hockey career, filling our already cozy home with lavish furniture and expensive clothes that reflected her taste, not ours. One afternoon, as I was trying to rearrange some of these new additions to make space for my own things, Susan walked in, her eyes scanning the room critically. "Lila, what are you doing? You're just moving things around without improving anything. You should focus more on resting and less on these useless activities," she snapped, her tone harsh and condescending. I bit my tongue, holding back my frustration. "I'm just trying to make some space, Susan. It's getting a bit crowded in here." "Crowded? This is quality, Lila. These are things a proper home should have. You should be thankful," she retorted, waving a dismissive hand at my simpler decorations. Feeling the sting of her words, I tried to keep my cool. "Susan, I appreciate your help around the house, but maybe we could tone down the shopping a bit. There's hardly space to move." Susan's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. "I'm only trying to bring some standard to this place. If you can't see that, it's not my problem. You should focus on what's important, like taking care of David." The remark hit harder than expected, and I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. This wasn't the home I had envisioned for us, filled with love and mutual respect, but rather, it was turning into a showcase of Susan's tastes and preferences. Later that evening, when David got home from practice, I decided it was time to discuss the living situation. "David, we need to talk about your mom," I started, my voice steady but filled with concern. "What about her?" He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat down. "She's taking over the house, David. And she's constantly criticizing me, making me feel like I'm not doing enough around here," I explained, hoping he'd understand. David's face hardened, and he sighed deeply. "Lila, she's just trying to help. You know how she is. She wants everything to be perfect. You should try to get along, show her some respect." As the days turned into weeks, Susan's dominance in our home grew. My attempts to reclaim some sense of normalcy or to assert my preferences were met with cold resistance from Susan and frustrating neutrality from David. The more I tried to adapt, the more isolated I felt within my own walls. It was a routine morning, and I was at the clinic for a regular pregnancy checkup, expecting nothing but good news. But the doctor's face told a different story as he reviewed the ultrasound images. "Lila, it seems there's a significant developmental issue with the fetus." I recommend further tests, but you need to be prepared for all possible outcomes, including the possibility of not carrying to term. The drive home was a blur, and walking into the house, I was met by Susan's scrutinizing gaze. "Well, what did the doctor say?" she demanded, her tone more intrusive than concerned. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's not great news, Susan. There are complications. The baby might not make it." Susan's reaction was cold, almost mechanical. "I see. Well, you need to think about what's best, for you and for David. Sometimes these things are for the best." Her words stung, but I had no energy to argue. I needed David, his support more than ever. When he finally came home, I told him everything, the tears I had held back now freely streaming down my face. David looked devastated, but his words were hollow. "I'm so sorry, Lila. We'll get through this. Whatever you need, I'm here." But as the days went on, David's promise felt empty. He seemed distant, retreating into his own world, leaving me to cope with my grief and fear alone. Meanwhile, Susan's true colors came out more vividly than ever. One evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to find some distraction in a book, Susan sat across from me, her eyes sharp. "Lila, you need to think about the future. If this pregnancy isn't going to work out, maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time you and David reconsidered your situation. A childless marriage is bound to fail." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Anger boiled inside me, but before I could respond, David walked in. I looked to him for support, but instead of defending me, he stayed silent. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the day came when the complications of my pregnancy could no longer be managed. The doctors did what they could, but the decision was inevitable. The pregnancy had to be terminated. As I lay in the hospital bed, coming to terms with the loss, the doctor explained the gravity of my condition. "It's going to be difficult for you to get pregnant again," he said with a somber look. Returning home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was drained, not just physically, but emotionally. My heart ached in a way that words couldn't describe. I walked through the door in tears, a mess of grief and broken dreams, hoping, praying for some semblance of comfort from the people who were supposed to be my family. What I walked into was anything but comforting. Susan wasted no time. As soon as she saw my state, her words sliced through the air, cold and sharp. "Well, look at you. I told you, didn't I? You just aren't cut out for this. You can't even manage to have a healthy child." Her cruel words hit me like physical blows. I stood there, stunned into silence, my tears falling faster. I looked to David, desperate for him to say something, anything in my defense. But David was distant, his eyes avoiding mine. He shifted uncomfortably, then said, "Look, Lila, I have important matches coming up. I can't have all this drama around. It's just too much." I stared at him, disbelief clouding my pain. Our child was not just some drama, David. This was our baby, our future. How can you be so cold? David's face hardened. "I'm tired, Lila. Tired of your complaints and all these problems. I've got a career, and honestly, I've got plenty of options." He paused, his voice dropping as he added, "Maybe it's better if we just end this. I need someone who fits into my life, not complicates it." Susan clapped her hands, a twisted smile on her face. "Finally, some sense from you, David. Lila, you heard him. Pack your things. It's time for you to leave." David didn't help me with my bags, he didn't even say goodbye. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of that click echoed in my heart. When I arrived at my parents' house, my tears hadn't stopped. Seeing me in such a state, Dad was furious. What happened, Lila? Tell me everything, he demanded, his voice a mix of concern and anger. Through sobs, I recounted everything, how Susan and David had treated me, the cruel words, the demand that I leave the house we shared. Dad's face turned red with each detail I shared, his fists clenching at his sides. This is not going to stand, Lila. We're going to make sure you get what you deserve, he said, pulling out his phone to make a call. Within hours, he had lined up meetings with some of the best lawyers in the city. The next few days were a whirlwind. We met with a sharp and determined lawyer named Helen, who was appalled by my story. We'll file for divorce immediately and sue for half of every investment you made in that house, she declared, her tone fierce and resolute. True to her word, Helen moved quickly. The divorce papers were served to David, and the lawsuit for my share of the house investments was filed. David and Susan were shocked. As the legal battle ensued, it became clear that they were in a precarious financial situation because of my mother-in-law's ill-considered spending. David and Susan were forced to sell the house. Meanwhile, David's life seemed to spiral. He met a young fan, a girl who was smitten with the shining star, and married her hastily. I heard about the wedding through friends. It didn't sting as much as I thought it would. Instead, it felt like confirmation that leaving him was the right decision. But Susan couldn't resist one last jab. A few weeks after David's rushed wedding, I received a letter from her. Inside was a photo from the wedding, showing Susan beaming next to David and his new wife. On the back, Susan had written a note. Finally, my son has found a young and healthy woman who will give birth to healthy children for him. The cruelty of her words was meant to wound, and it did, but not as deeply as she intended. The lawsuit dragged on, but eventually, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded half of the investment we had made in our former home, a sum that significantly strained David's finances further. 2 years have rolled by since I last walked out of that house, feeling broken and betrayed. A lot has changed since then, especially for me and my dad's company. We've been breaking into the international market, and my work paid off in a big way. I received an international award in IT technology, a recognition that came with a prize of $1 million. Just when I thought things were settling down, my phone rang. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize at first, but the voice that greeted me was unmistakably Susan's. Lila, you need to come back to David, she stated bluntly, no hellos, no how have you been. I paused, taken aback. Susan? Why would you think I'd come back? Her voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. David's been injured, a bad accident during a match. He's in a wheelchair now, can't play anymore. His wife left him, took half of everything. We need you. Her words were a jolt, but not enough to shake the foundation I'd rebuilt. And you think I should return because of his injury? Why, Susan? Just because I have money now? She didn't hesitate. You're rich now, Lila. You can afford to take care of him. And me. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'll even cook for you and let you have children, imagine that. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. Susan, do you hear yourself? You want me back as some sort of nursemaid to David and his financial backer to you, just because I won money? It's always about money with you. Susan's voice cracked, angry and sharp. You owe us, after everything. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. I owe you nothing, Susan. I built my life again from scratch, without any help from you or David. You threw me out when I was at my lowest. Why would I ever think of coming back? There was a silence on the other end, heavy and thick. Then Susan spat out, You're making a huge mistake, Lila. I made my mistakes, Susan, but I learned from them. And returning to a life that nearly broke me isn't a mistake I'll make twice. I replied, my voice calm and steady. Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of freedom. Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. I was truly free, and my life was my own. Looking around my office, filled with awards and the buzzing of computers, I knew I was right where I was meant to be. Later, at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony, looking out over the city lights. The challenges of the past seemed like distant memories, and the future was bright and full of promise. I had found success and contentment in my work, and I was surrounded by people who valued and respected me. As I sipped my wine, I thought about Susan's call, her voice so filled with anger and desperation. It was clear that in her world, money still dictated worth. But in my world, I measured wealth not by dollars in the bank, but by the happiness and peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. One crisp morning, as I walked into the office, the buzz of the upcoming product launch was palpable. My team, a group of brilliant and driven individuals, greeted me with enthusiastic updates. Lila, we're almost ready to roll out the new software. Just a few tweaks left. Jenna, one of our lead developers, informed me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. That's great to hear, Jenna. Make sure those tweaks are solid. We can't afford slips, not with so much riding on this, I replied, my tone both encouraging and firm. Jenna nodded, her demeanor serious. Absolutely, Lila. We're on it. I received a call from Dad later. His voice was brimming with pride. Lila, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Not just for your success at the company, but for how you've handled everything life threw at you. Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear that from you. I couldn't have done it without your support, I responded, feeling a warmth spread through me. You did the heavy lifting, kiddo. I was just here to offer a hand when you needed it, he said, and we both laughed. That evening, as I walked through the park on my way home, I felt a deep sense of peace. I stopped for a moment, taking in the beauty of the setting sun, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was moments like this that I had once thought were lost to me forever. But here I was, standing strong, the master of my fate once more. I had faced betrayal and loss, fought back against those who sought to bring me down, and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. As I resumed my walk, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to use my experiences to help others who might be facing their own battles. Perhaps a foundation, something that could offer support and strength to those in need. From the moment I could understand things, it was clear that my older brother Tommy was the golden child, and I was just there. The girl, the afterthought. Nicole, make sure you're home by 3:30 to help your brother with his lunch, Mom would say almost every morning before school. I was 12, Tommy was 15, and apparently, making a sandwich was too difficult for the family prodigy. But Mom, I wanted to join the art club after school, I'd plead, knowing it was useless. Your brother has football practice. He needs proper nutrition. You know how important that is for him. She'd give me that look, the one that said the discussion was over before it began. Meanwhile, Tommy would be sprawled on the couch, his latest iPhone in hand, a birthday gift that made my hand-me-down flip phone feel like a relic from another century. Yeah, Nikki, he'd smirk, not even looking up from his screen, be a good sister. Dad was even worse about it. Nicole, this is good practice for when you're a wife, he'd say, as if that was the pinnacle of what I could aspire to. A woman needs to know how to take care of her family. Every day was the same routine. I'd rush home from school, throw together whatever Tommy wanted to eat, iron his clothes for the next day, and try to squeeze in my homework between chores. While I was doing all this, Tommy would be at one of his many after-school activities, football, debate club, computer programming classes. Mom and Dad made sure he had every opportunity available. The only person who seemed to really see me, was Grandma Rose. Her old Victorian house on the other side of town became my sanctuary. Every weekend I'd bike over there, pedaling fast through the tree-lined streets until I saw her distinctive wraparound porch come into view. "There's my girl," she'd call out from her garden, her silver hair gleaming in the sun. Inside her house, there was no hierarchy, no golden child. Just warmth, cookies, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Grandma Rose's house was like something out of an old movie, all creaky floorboards, carved wooden banisters, and rooms full of fascinating treasures. Sure, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and some of the windows stuck when you tried to open them, but I loved every imperfect inch of it. It felt more like home than our pristine suburban house ever did. What made it special wasn't just the building itself, but how Grandma treated us when we were there. Whether it was Christmas, birthdays, or just a regular weekend visit, Tommy and I always got the same treatment. Same size cookies, same loving hugs, same thoughtful gifts. It drove Tommy absolutely crazy. I'll never forget the day it all came to a head. It was Tommy's 16th birthday, and Grandma had gotten us both new tablets, nice ones, but identical. Tommy took one look at his and exploded. "Are you kidding me?" He stood up, face red with anger. "Nicole gets the exact same thing as me? On my birthday?" Grandma Rose sat calmly in her antique armchair, hands folded in her lap. "Tommy, dear, I love you both equally. But that's not fair," he was practically shouting now. "Mom and Dad always give me better stuff. They know I deserve it. I'm the one with the grades, the sports achievements, the future. Nicole just exists." I felt like I'd been slapped, but before I could say anything, Grandma Rose stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over all of us. Thomas Michael Parker, her voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. "You will not speak about your sister that way in my house. Or anywhere else, for that matter. I will not allow it." Tommy stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that Grandma's collection of china teacups rattled in their cabinet. I expected that to be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, Grandma showed up at our house unannounced. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening to her talking to Mom and Dad in the living room. Her voice carried clearly, "The way you're raising these children is unacceptable. The favoritism needs to stop." "Mom, we're doing what's best for both of them," my mother tried to argue. "Really? Is that what you call it?" Grandma's voice was cold. "Well, if you want my continued financial support for their upbringing, things need to change." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in their bedroom. "We can't afford to lose her money," Mom was saying. "We need it for Tommy's college fund, for all his activities." "I know," Dad sighed. "We'll have to play along. Give Nicole some stuff too. Keep your mother happy." Suddenly, everything changed. Within a week, I was enrolled in the piano lessons I'd been begging for since I was 10. A new iPhone appeared on my bedside table. My parents started asking about my day at dinner. The next time I visited Grandma, she was tending to her roses in the garden. She looked up at me with a knowing smile. "You know, dear," she said, printing shears in hand, "I get detailed reports of how every penny of my support money is spent. Your parents seem to be making much better choices lately, don't you think? It's a strange feeling when you realize your parents' love comes with conditions." Yes, they were going through the motions, asking about my day, buying me things, showing up at my school events, but their hearts weren't in it. Their eyes would still light up differently when Tommy walked into the room. I learned to accept it. At least now I had my piano lessons and didn't have to spend every afternoon being Tommy's personal maid. Sometimes acceptance is easier than hoping for change. When Tommy graduated high school and got accepted to State University 3 hours away, you'd think he'd won the Nobel Prize. Mom and Dad threw this huge party, invited all the relatives, made speeches about their brilliant son. Grandma Rose sat in the corner, watching it all with those knowing eyes of hers. For the first few months, all we heard during family dinners was how well Tommy was doing at college. He'd call home weekly, telling stories about his classes, his professors, his bright future in business. Mom and Dad would put him on speakerphone, beaming with pride. Then came the letter. I was in my senior year of high school when Dad stormed into the house waving an official-looking envelope, his face purple with rage. Tommy was on academic probation, at risk of being expelled. Turns out all those study sessions he'd been talking about were actually parties. He'd barely attended any classes. Grandma Rose showed up the next day. I'd never seen her so angry. If you don't get that boy in line, she told my parents, her voice like steel, don't expect me to pay for another college when he gets himself kicked out of this one. And believe me, no other school will take him with these grades. The threat of losing Grandma's money sent my parents into a panic. They drove to State University that very weekend. I don't know exactly what they said to Tommy, but when he called the following week, he sounded different. Subdued. For once in his life, Tommy had to face actual consequences. By some miracle, Tommy managed to pull his grades up enough to stay in school. He graduated 4 years later and decided to stay in that city, taking a job at a local company. Meanwhile, I'd gotten into the business management program at City College, just 20 minutes from home. Grandma Rose paid my tuition too, though my parents barely seemed to notice I was in college at all. When I made the dean's list, the only celebration was a phone call with Grandma. 4 years flew by, and suddenly I was graduating with honors. Grandma was there, of course, beaming proudly. My parents showed up too, though they spent most of the ceremony talking about how Tommy was doing at his new job. I didn't care anymore. I had my degree, and better yet, I had a job offer from Parker & Associates, one of the biggest marketing firms in town. When Grandma Rose passed away, it felt like the world stopped spinning for a while. The day of her funeral, I couldn't stop staring at her garden, wondering who would tend to her beloved roses now. The reading of the will was held in her attorney's office, a week after the funeral. Tommy flew in from out of state, wearing an expensive suit that somehow still made him look like a kid playing dress-up. Mom and Dad sat between us, as if they were still needed as buffers after all these years. Mrs. Rose Parker's estate, the attorney began, adjusting his glasses, is to be divided between her 2 grandchildren, Nicole and Thomas Parker. He paused, looking at both of us. The division is to be determined by their own choice. One will receive the house, and the other will receive a sum of $500,000. The first choice goes to Thomas, as the elder grandchild. Tommy actually snorted. Is this some kind of joke? He looked around the room. You really expect me to want that musty old house? No, I'll take the money. I've got plans. I'm going to start my own business, show everyone what I can do. Nicole can have the old lady house with all its weird smells and creaky floors. I sat there, my heart pounding. The house, Grandma's house. My sanctuary all those years. I'll take it, I said quietly, but firmly. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and determination. At Parker & Associates, I threw myself into every project, every challenge. My team's sales numbers kept breaking records, and within 3 years, I was promoted to head of sales. The salary increases that came with my success went straight into renovating Grandma's house. I took my time with the renovation, carefully preserving the house's character while modernizing everything else. New wiring, new plumbing, a state-of-the-art kitchen that still somehow felt like it belonged in a Victorian home. The garden I did myself, learning everything I could about roses, and continuing Grandma's legacy. Mom and Dad came to visit once it was done. I watched their faces as they walked through the restored rooms, saw how their eyes widened at the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the gourmet kitchen. "This is incredible." Mom ran her hand along the marble countertop. Dad nodded, then sighed. "It's a shame Tommy didn't take the house. This would have been perfect for him and his new wife." And there it was. Some things never change. "Speaking of which," Mom added, trying to sound casual, "have you heard from your brother lately?" I hadn't, of course. None of us had been invited to his wedding 6 months ago. He'd gotten married in his wife's hometown, surrounded by her family and their mutual friends. Mom had shown me pictures she'd found on Facebook, Tommy in a tux, his new wife Rebecca beaming in designer white. The doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon while I was pruning Grandma's roses. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I took my time wiping the dirt from my hands before heading to the door. When I opened it, I nearly dropped my gardening gloves. There stood Tommy, looking nothing like the confident businessman he'd been pretending to be on social media. Beside him stood a woman I recognized from the wedding photos, Rebecca, his wife. She wore designer clothes and too much makeup, her eyes scanning my home like she was conducting an inspection. Tommy gave me an apologetic look. "Can we talk privately for a minute, Nikki?" We stepped into Grandma's old study, now my home office. Tommy closed the door behind us and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, desperation. "I need your help, sis," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The business, it's not good. We're about to lose everything. We had to give up our apartment, and..." He ran his hands through his hair. "Could we stay here for a while? Just until things turn around?" I stood there, stunned. Tommy had never asked me for anything before, unless you count all those years of demanded lunches and ironed clothes. "Please," he added, and for the first time since we were kids, I saw my brother instead of my parents' golden child. "Okay," I heard myself say. "But just temporarily." The next morning, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Mom and Dad, practically bouncing with excitement. We came as soon as Tommy told us. Mom rushed past me to embrace Rebecca. "Oh, sweetheart, we're so happy to finally meet you in person." For the next 2 hours, I might as well have been invisible. I served coffee, at Mom's imperious request, and listened as Rebecca charmed my parents with stories about her family's social connections and Tommy's brilliant business ventures. "Nicole," Mom called out as I headed to the kitchen, "be a dear and make us some lunch." Something nice, Rebecca's used to fine dining. That set the tone for the weeks that followed. I'd come home from long days at work to find Tommy and Rebecca lounging in my living room, expecting dinner to magically appear. "Aren't you going to start cooking?" Rebecca asked one evening, not looking up from her phone. "We're starving." "I just worked a 12-hour day," I replied, dropping my briefcase. "Why don't you cook something?" Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? You should be grateful we let you stay here at all. The least you could do is cook decent meals." I turned to Tommy, confused. He pulled me into the study again. "Look," he whispered urgently, "Rebecca thinks this is my house. She thinks I'm letting you stay here out of kindness. She comes from money, she's used to a certain lifestyle. If she finds out I'm basically bankrupt," his voice cracked, "she'll leave me." I stared at my brother, this man who'd had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging me to lie to his wife. "Fine," I said finally. "I won't tell her. But you two need to start treating me with respect in my own home." No more demands, no more attitude. Deal? Deal, Tommy nodded quickly. Thank you, Nikki. I mean it. True to his word, Tommy's demands for home-cooked meals stopped. Instead, I'd come home to find takeout containers from the city's finest restaurants scattered across my kitchen counter. Rebecca would be lounging on my sofa, picking at pad thai or sushi, barely acknowledging my presence. I didn't ask questions. Honestly, I was just relieved not to be playing chef after long days at the office. I settled into my own routine, grabbing dinner from the casual cafe near work. The arrangement seemed to be working. They stayed out of my way, I stayed out of theirs. Then came the phone call. Nicole? Mom's voice had that tone, the one she used when she was about to demand something. We need to discuss the restaurant bills. Tommy told us she'd cover the expenses at the end of the month. It's nearly $3,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Well, you can't expect them to starve, Mom continued, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Tommy said you agreed to handle their food expenses since they're going through a rough patch. I've been putting it all on my credit card. I'll text you the account details for the transfer. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I pulled up my text messages and sent one to Tommy. Come to me, now. He must have heard something in those 2 words, because he appeared in my study within 15 minutes. Rebecca was out shopping, with whose money, I didn't want to know. Care to explain why Mom thinks I'm paying for your 5-star takeout habit? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Tommy's face did that thing it used to do when we were kids, and he got caught in a lie, a quick flash of guilt before the excuses started flowing. Nikki, you have to understand. Understand what? That you're stealing from our parents now too? I'm not stealing. He ran his hands through his hair. I just borrowed. I was going to pay them back when things turned around. But Rebecca, she has certain expectations. If she knew how bad things really are. Stop, I held up my hand. I've heard enough about Rebecca's expectations. This ends now. I'll figure something out, he promised, his eyes pleading. Just give me more time. Don't tell Rebecca, please, Nikki. I've never asked you for anything. Never asked me for anything? I stood up, my voice rising. Are you kidding me? My entire childhood was spent catering to your needs. And now you're living in my house, lying to your wife, and scamming our parents. I know, he held up his hands. I'm sorry, really. Just one more chance. I'll handle the restaurant bills. I promise. I stared at my brother, this man who had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging his little sister to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Fine, I said finally. One more chance. But I mean it, Tommy. Figure out your own food situation. And I'm not paying a cent of those bills. Life fell into an uncomfortable routine over the next 2 months. I'd go to work, manage my department, come home to find my house looking like a hurricane had swept through it, and spend my evenings cleaning up after Tommy and Rebecca. They seemed to exist in their own bubble of leisure, lunches with our parents, dinners at expensive restaurants, shopping trips I didn't want to know the details of. Then came the day that changed everything. Tommy had left early, muttering something about a business meeting. I came home from work earlier than usual, having wrapped up a major sales presentation, looking forward to a quiet evening with a glass of wine. Rebecca was waiting for me in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa like a queen about to deliver a royal decree. We need to talk, she announced, gesturing to the armchair across from her. Sit. I raised an eyebrow at her tone, but sat down anyway. Might as well hear whatever this was about. I've been patient, Rebecca began, examining her manicured nails. I've watched you swagger around this house like you own the place, making everyone uncomfortable. But enough is enough. I blinked. Excuse me? From now on, you'll pay us $2,000 a month in rent. That's more than fair, given the neighborhood. She smiled tightly. And you'll resume cooking and cleaning duties. The state of this house is embarrassing, and since you're the tenant, I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but full-blown, tears in my eyes laughter. Rebecca's face darkened. What exactly is so amusing? I wiped my eyes, trying to catch my breath. Rebecca, honey, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is my house, I own it. Your husband is living here because I took pity on him when he came begging at my door. The color drained from her face. You're lying. Call him, I said, leaning back in my chair. Go ahead. Ask Tommy who owns this house. Her hands shaking slightly, Rebecca pulled out her phone and dialed. Tommy answered on the second ring. Darling, her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Nicole is spinning some ridiculous story about owning the house. Tell her she's mistaken. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She's telling the truth, Tommy's voice crackled through the speaker. It's her house. Grandma left it to her in the will. I took the money instead to start a business, but I failed. We're broke. I've been trying to find a way to tell you. Rebecca stood up so fast, she knocked over her water glass. I watched as she stormed upstairs, heard drawers slamming, closet doors banging. Within 20 minutes, she was dragging her designer suitcases down my stairs. She didn't say a word as she left. The slam of the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. The morning after Rebecca left, I was enjoying my coffee in peaceful silence when Tommy burst through the front door. His face was twisted with rage, all traces of yesterday's contrition gone. This is all your fault, he shouted, stalking into my kitchen. Rebecca's filing for divorce. She won't even talk to me. You had no right to tell her the truth. I set my coffee cup down carefully, remembering all the times I'd backed down from his anger over the years. Not this time. No, right? I stood up slowly. This is my house, Tommy. The house you laughed at me for choosing. The house you said smelled like an old lady. The house you've been lying about to your wife while mooching off our parents. And you're telling me I had no right? You ruined everything. He slammed his fist on my counter. You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Always waiting for a chance to get back at me. Get out. My voice was quiet but firm. Take your things and go. He stared at me for a moment, then stormed upstairs. I listened to him throwing things around in the guest room, probably breaking something expensive. I didn't care. When he came back down with his bags, he gave me one last venomous look. I had exactly 1 hour of peace before my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. How could you do this to your brother? She didn't even say hello. He's devastated. He's back home with us now, crying his eyes out. That's not my problem. Of course it's your problem. Dad's voice now. They had me on speaker. You need to give Tommy the house. It's the only way to save his marriage. Rebecca might come back if they have a proper home. I actually laughed. Are you serious? You want me to give away my house because Tommy lied to his wife and ruined his business? He's your brother. Mom was practically shrieking now. Family helps family. Really? I felt a lifetime of resentment bubbling up. Where was that family spirit when I was cooking and cleaning for Tommy as a kid? Where was it when you ignored my achievements because you were too busy praising him? The only person who ever treated me like family was Grandma, and she left this house to me. This conversation is over. 2 months later, I heard through work colleagues that Tommy's company had officially declared bankruptcy. His divorce was finalized around the same time. He was living with our parents, apparently regrouping, their favorite word for Tommy's failures. I wasn't surprised when all three of them showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. Mom was clutching a casserole dish like a peace offering. Dad had that stern look he used to use when he was about to lecture me about family duty. Tommy stood behind them, trying to look pitiful. I watched them through the security camera Grandma had installed years ago. They rang the bell again and again. Mom started calling out, "Nicole, we know you're in there. We need to talk about this as a family." I picked up my phone and sent a single text to all three of them, "Please leave. Do not come back. This is your only warning before I call the police." They left eventually, but not before Mom left the casserole on my porch with a note about forgiveness and family obligations. I donated the casserole to the homeless shelter down the street. These days, my life is peaceful. I tend to Grandma's roses, which are blooming more beautifully than ever. My career is thriving. I made Executive VP last month. I feel good, and it's all thanks to Grandma.